Welcome to Women's Sacred Conversations on the Venerable Podcast. Hey, sisters. These conversations are sacred because they resonate with the energy of wisdom, inspiration, and self-empowerment. We're going to be talking about all of those things in this podcast. And all of this from the perspective of divine feminine qualities like love, compassion, collaboration, intuition, and inner power. During this podcast, open yourself to feeling uplifted and inspired. We are women together on a journey of wholeness and happiness, constantly evolving and expanding our consciousness. And I am so happy you are listening. Our conversations go deep with women thought leaders focused on honoring and awakening the divine feminine in all people. And we'll talk about that as well a little bit more, that idea of the divine feminine in all people. Our extraordinary guest coming up soon for this sacred conversation is Reverend Judith Laxer. I'm your host, Dawn Morningstar. I'm a women's empowerment coach for nearly 30 years now. Can't believe that. It's been a beautiful journey. I have an award-winning book about women's empowerment that's called Venerable Women, Transform Ourselves, Transform the World. And I'm the founder of the Venerable Women Sisterhood and Empowerment Foundation. Dawn Morningstar is my given name, and I'm grateful to my parents for being brave enough to name me in a way that describes awakening and new beginnings. Each one of us who chooses to can become aware and begin again as many times as we want or need to create our highest and best lives. So what is our highest and best life? I know people say to me all the time, Dawn, you're always yammering on about your highest and best life. What do you mean by that? Living as our highest self is being fully aware of and honoring the things that we value. And living as our best self is putting those values into practice. So like two wings of a butterfly, we take flight as our highest and best selves, live happier, and are of greater service to others. We stop playing small and start being the women we came to this earth to be. And I do want to say a little word or two about the idea of happiness. I've had some women say, oh, that's a surface emotion. It should be joy. It should be, you know what? I don't care what we call it, as long as we're being a little happier, right? So anyway, venerable, what the heck is that? Venerable is the fancy pants, high resonance word we chose to use to describe ourselves. That means worthy of honor, love, and respect by virtue of our wisdom and experience. All people, and I do mean all people, are venerable and worthy at their core. And each of us is being called to awaken the venerability within ourselves and to acknowledge venerability in other people. And it is really time for women to claim their venerability, their worthiness and self-love, especially after 10,000 years of patriarchy, masculine rule. We're going to talk much more about that with Judith shortly. I just want to let you know there will be links to everything we mention in the podcast show notes, which will be available in the next few days. If you are not on our email list, please sign up on the Venerable Women website, that's venerablewomen.com, so that you'll receive the recording of this podcast and other offerings that we have. And it would really mean a lot to me if you would subscribe to our monthly podcast and give us a 5-star rating and review if that's what you really feel. If you love this and it's making you happy, give us that 5-star rating. That kind of pushes us up and out so that more people on a path similar to ours can find us. So let's take a moment, breathe into this very sacred moment. Become very, very present and open our minds and hearts to our very special guest, whom I am so happy to introduce to you, Reverend Judith Laxer. Hey, Judith.
Hi, Dawn. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And what a beautiful introduction.
I know. It's just so much fun to talk about these wonderful concepts and ideas that inspire all of us to, like I was saying before, like stop playing small and just really, be the women, fully be the women we came here to be. So I'm going to tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Okay.
And before I do, I had the distinct honor and privilege to hear Judith's keynote at the Women in Spirituality conference back in September in Rochester, Minnesota. It was an extraordinary talk, and people I know who were there are still talking about what you talked about, Judith.
Oh,
So
thank you so much.
So a little bit about you. You are a modern day mystic who believes that humor, beauty, and the wonders of nature make life worth living. The founding priestess of Gaia's temple. I love that so much. Can't wait to hear more about that. Which is an inclusive earth-based ministry in Seattle, Washington. Judith also enjoys a successful private practice as a psychic, spiritual counselor, hypnotherapist, shamanic practitioner, and teacher of women's mysteries. God, I love this so much. A keynote speaker and author of Along the Wheel of Time, Sacred Stories for nature lovers, I'll get that out, which is, it's published by Ravenswood Publishing. Judith has presented classes and workshops on the re-emergence of the divine feminine since 1993 at conferences internationally. She dedicates her work to restoring the balance between feminine and masculine energy in our culture. Her website is judithlaxer.com. That's Judith Laxer, Laxer.com. Or you can go to gaiastemple.org. And again, these links will be in our show notes, which you will be able to click on. You'll get a copy of the podcast, and when you look at the show notes, you click on the link and it'll be live. You can go right to both or either of these websites. So welcome, 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 Judith.
Thank you so much.
So venerable, as I was saying before, is our fancy pants word that means worthy of honor, love, and respect by virtue of wisdom and experience. And I wanted to start off by asking you, how do you personally know when you've activated your venerable self and are living from that place of like really feeling worthy?
Well, I think we're just going to jump right into the deep end on this. This is a very thought-provoking question. And when I first read it, because you sent it to me ahead of time, like, here's what I'm thinking. I was like, wow, I really had to think about that. Like, how do I know that I am venerable? I know that I am, but how do I know, or what is it that happens so that I am acutely aware of that? And it was quite an interesting thing to think about this. And why I said I want to jump straight into the deep end of this is that because I think this worthiness is a spiritual concept. And if we are raised in, which most of us are, the Abrahamic religions, Judeo-Christian, Muslim religions, we are raised to believe that as women, we are not only not venerable and not worthy, but we are inherently guilty.
Yes, and evil, right?
And evil. And we are the bringers of original sin. And, we all know Eve was framed, but we're still living, as if that creation story was true. And so, I rejected my birth religion very early on. And So as far as how do I know that I'm worthy, I just feel like I can't not be worthy, because the purity of that spiritual concept is, as you said, everyone is inherently worthy at their core. Now, as far as how it plays out in the world, I've been doing my work for a long time, over 30 years. As you mentioned, you've been doing yours. And so, after a while of working the principles that are at your core values, living in accordance with them, and then finding that, the feedback that you get from the world, the positive feedback that you get about your work, about how you're helping people, about how you're living your life, and the things that people admire or seek you out for, I guess that's confirmation of the worthiness and venerability. But for me, it really started very young, when I just said, this whole story that says because I'm a woman, I'm not worthy or I'm guilty. I guess I just came in a very strong feminist, like from the get-go. I was here to do this, I was born to do this.
So this lifetime was not your first rodeo, right?
No, I don't think it was. I do not think it was.
Well, you brought up a really interesting point that answers the question that I asked you exquisitely, and that is that idea of living in accordance with your values and principles, how that it puts you on this path and this resonant level of being that attracts other people to you like that.
Yes,
and
it's a vibration, right?
Yes, it's about the vibration. And here's the thing. I feel like unless we are really paying attention and being aware of what those values and principles are, we can't honor them. We can't play them out. It's kind of like the highest and best concept that I was talking about before. Your highest self are those aspirational values, those like really high resonating values. But if we don't pay attention to what they are, then how do we know how to express them in the world anyway? So How did you come to, it sounds like you knew, you just had an inherent sense of knowing, but like through the years, what else did you do to like really do that deep dive to find out what do you value and what are your principles?
Wow, that's there are several different things that I can point to about that. And I think it really begins with always feeling other. I always felt other, meaning I felt like I belong, that I was definitely born into my family and was part of that whole family constellation. But my sensibilities about the world were very different from my family's from the very beginning. I had a lot of psychic experiences as a child, which most children do until we learn to shut it down because it's not acceptable, right? And but those just continued on and on for me. And it was more about, I think, my interfacing with mystery and the understanding that there was more than we could see and touch and smell and feel in this world, in the material world. There was just this inherent knowing that there was more. So I think I came in as a really spiritual psychic kid, and so I didn't really fit in, and I just felt other. And so I think as I began to grow up and came to realize that the rest of the world did not see the fairies in the garden, and they didn't hear things before they were spoken, and know what people were feeling despite how they were acting, that those deeper knowings. The majority of the world and the people around me were not operating like that. And so I I didn't shut it down, but I certainly kept it under wraps. But what it did, I think, was propel me to look deeper into the world. And in many ways, it was because, why am I like this? Why do I see that? And my sisters don't, for instance, or, the kids in school, or, my first lover, like what's going on here? What's going on here? And so I think it just that, and, my love of mystery, that it just is so compelling to me. And I think that just propelled me to look deeper and to do that deeper work.
I love that. I love that so much. Two things come to mind. One is, can you describe or define what you mean by mystery?
Yes.
What is that?
I know it's like
It's a big word.
It is. I have a small women's mystery school, and people go, "Mystery school? What's that?" I go, "I don't know. It's a mystery." It's interesting because it's hard to articulate really what mystery is. But I can give an example of an experience a seminal experience when I was younger, and that was this. When I was 12 years old, my Aunt Renee died on her 50th birthday. And then she came to me in a dream a year later, and there's a lot more to the story. This is the Reader's Digest of this story, of this version. And she came to me a year later in dreams and asked me to apologize to my mother for something that happened long before I was born, and apparently was very hush-hush. There was no way I could know about it. And it was a very frightening dream, actually. I was 12, so I didn't have any context for this sort of thing. And my own sobbing woke me up, and I went down to the kitchen when my parents were having their morning coffee, and they were like, "What's the matter?" And I said, Aunt Renee told me to apologize to you for blah, 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 whatever it was. And they both looked at me like, wow. Actually, not wow. They looked at me like something was wrong here, which was part of what made me think, I better keep it under wraps. It's not safe. But, you have an encounter with a mystery like that. And, not just that you dream about someone who has died, but, the 19th century mystics used to call this ascending, where the spirit would come back between the veil to bring a message. And further into the future, because she came to me in a dream for several years after that, until finally I had the courage to ask her, "Why are you coming to me?" Wow. And she answered, "Because you're the only one who can hear me."
Oh, chills. Love
and that
this.
was a message that I received at 18 years old.
Wow.
And so, because it was about 5 or 6 years that she was coming to me. So So you interact with something like that. It is as real as making your first cup of joe in the morning. It is just so real. And you can't, for me anyway, I can't dispute it, or I can't deny the truth of it. And so it just, life kept showing me that there was more to it than getting good grades and parting your hair straight, to go to school and all of the sort of things in the mundane world.
That's a beautiful answer to the question about mystery. It's just not, it's probably, you're right. I mean, the very nature of the word mystery is that it is a mystery, yet the example that you gave, I imagine that many of our listeners will be able to point to a time in their life where they experienced something similar that felt like, oh gosh, this is not in the everyday. This does not feel like, just what I can touch and taste and see. This is,
and
this
like
is
you
different.
said, if they're paying attention.
Yes.
Right. Because I think mysteries happen all the time, and we just go, oh no, that, that's not it. Where's my whatever? And we move on. We don't really give it much credence because we're not paying attention.
Absolutely. It's happening all the time.
Yeah, it's happening all the time, all around us. So, obviously a mystery is something that we can't explain in words. And so for me, mystery and faith are really, they dovetail and they make very good bedfellows, because both of them are things that cannot be explained, and yet they are experienced in their totality.
Yes.
That was a very real experience for me. It was seminal. It changed my life. My Aunt Renee let me know that my experiences are called, quote unquote, psychic, and that I am open to these things and I have these gifts. And I mean, now I may earn my living in part as a psychic.
Yes.
So there's something that happened when I was very, very young. It's been kind of the through line through my life in this way. And I just want to go back to something about the concept of other, because I think this is really important for women to know, because we are taught that we're supposed to comply, fit in, wear the latest whatever, be on trend in order to be okay. And the true change makers, I think, start out or often feel like they don't belong and they can't find their tribe. And who is this people I'm calling my family? And why don't they understand me? And, you know, all of those things that can, if we don't have the context for it, for us, really derail us instead of saying, oh, so I'm not the normal usual, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong here.
Absolutely. Well, you know, that's one of the reasons that I felt compelled and guided to start Venerable Women back in 2013. I had been coaching all those years and would hear similar stories to what you were talking about with your Aunt Renee. And yet the women that I would be coaching individually would say, but I don't know anybody else like me. And so I really want to say that your idea of belonging is really, you know, for women to come together either in whatever ways they can and know that they're not alone on this journey, and to take it back to something that, you know, in your early childhood, it sounds like you were both tenacious and that you trusted yourself. You were tenacious in that you just kept on going, even though there was listening and having, you know, allowing yourself to see the fairies in the garden and to listen to your Aunt Renee. And you just kept doing that and you trusted yourself. And that's something that I'd like to ask. I know this wasn't in our original questions.
Sure.
Yet, I think that that's where many of us can get stuck along the way, is we don't trust what it is, that we don't trust this amazing big energy that we have, this wisdom that we have. We don't trust it. And like you said, we try to either tamp it down or
deny it.
Or or shrink to fit, or, you know, all of that, or just fit in, try to fit in. So could you say a few words about how can a woman learn to really trust things like her intuition, her listening, her seeing, her own psychic abilities?
I think, you know, I'm such a wordy nerd, and I'm always looking at I'm always looking at the etymology of words. And,
me too.
Right. So trust, right? The root of trust is true. And so if what you do is choose to honor your experience as your truth, even though the person right next to you perceives it completely different, that's how you build trust within yourself. This is true for me. My gut is telling me not to cross the street here. Your gut might say it's perfectly fine to cross the street here, but mine is saying not to do it. And I'm going to listen to that and I'm going to honor it. It's a choice, really. It's a choice. But I think when it comes to trust, and goodness knows we've got many reasons not to trust in this world, right? Our trust has been blown over and over and over. Promises made, not kept, betrayals. I mean, we can find a million examples why it's not safe to trust. But when it comes to trusting, it's about the relationship with the self. And I think that if we develop our relationship with ourself and become our own best ally, and stop listening to the naysayers out there about everything, whatever they're naysaying, you know, that's like their truth and not mine. And so I think when we become our own best ally and then we tune in, it's easier to listen to our own truth, and that truth is going to develop into a way of being that is trusting.
I love it. I love it. So, Judith, what is your shouted from the mountaintop news? Like, what is it like? If you were like standing on a mountaintop with a megaphone where everybody who wanted to could hear what you have to say, what is it that is really feeling compelling and juicy to you right now?
What is compelling and juicy to me right now, and has been ever since I discovered her, which is a kind of funny way of saying it, is about the Divine Mother and about the divine feminine as a principle and also as a deity. Because in this patriarchy, the divine feminine has been denigrated, demoted, suppressed, hidden, diabolized, and look what has happened to women under that patriarchy. Now, don't get me wrong, all people suffer under patriarchy. Men and women suffer under patriarchy. But we're here to talk about venerable women and worthiness. And for me, it all comes down to this spiritual core. And the patriarchy, when the patriarchy came to power, and we can talk lots about that, when that happened, the systematic denigration of the divine feminine and the hiding of it and the co-opting of it, of her, was the source of exactly where we find ourselves in this world now. So imbalanced. So imbalanced in every way. Where greed and power over and supremacy and all of those constructs that are just horrible. And then you look at what's going on the planet, and we've wreaked havoc on the planet. So we're just getting down to that basic thing. We look at the planet, we call her Mother Earth.
Yes.
Right? If we don't revere the divine feminine, if we don't revere the planet as divine, this is what you do. You destroy it.
Yes. Well, one thing that I always like to bring up whenever we are talking, or any of us are having conversations about the divine feminine, is how do we speak to the idea that sometimes when males hear this, they become frightened. And
they do become frightened.
And something that I've been thinking about for the past few years is that patriarchy obviously didn't work. And as you said, rightfully so, it doesn't work for women, and it really doesn't work for men either. It doesn't work for anybody.
No.
I don't think that these hierarchies work. And I've heard some people say, and even on my book tours and things, people would say to me, oh, it's time for women to rule and women to take over. I don't know that, it's not that I don't know. I don't believe that's the answer either.
I don't think we want to go from I don't think we want to go from a patriarchy to a matriarchy.
So what do you think the answer is? Like, you mentioned the word harmony. What is harmony? What could that look like in the real, you know?
Well, I think what it could look like is more of an egalitarian model, which doesn't mean necessarily that everyone is equal. In power, or that everybody has or does the same thing. From my understanding, or maybe this is just making it up, but since I'm talking about what I think would make it a better world, I think that egalitarianism is the principle where each person has the opportunity to bring their particular gift to the table in contribution to the greater whole. So for some people, that might be the mechanical aspect of it. Like, I have this joke that I do because technology and I've gotten a lot better, but it's really not my friend. And it's very challenging for me to figure it out. And so then people will say, oh, all you have to do is just plug this in here and press this button. Like, it's easy, like saying you just have to lose 50 pounds. Oh, really? It's that easy. Okay, great. And so when they say, well, you just do this technological thing, I say, listen, I could stand over this thing. I could sing to it. I could counsel it. I could pray for it. I could memorialize it. But learn how to work it? I'm not so sure. So, that's a crazy story to say. I think we each have our own gifts. And in an egalitarian society, the gifts that we have, each one different, is honored as part of what it can contribute to the whole. Instead of a patriarchy that says you must comply with this set of rules in order to be successful, and the gifts that you have, because they don't fit this particular model, are not valued. And so you're not going to live a prosperous or easy life. And also the other thing is, I don't know, none of us know, because, it's 2019, according to how we've decided to divvy up time in this reality. But anyway, back when it is said that it was more of a matrifocal society rather than a matriarchy. And matrifocal means that the focus is on the women and the children.
Yes.
And
I've read that too.
I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think if we could get back to that, look at the difference in our world if what we did was protect and honor women and their children.
Absolutely. And there are so many ways that I do see that emerging more and more.
Mhm.
And I believe that conversations like this and gathering together with people who believe in these kinds of possibilities is a very good thing at this time
Yes, yes, it
in
is.
our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been criticized sometimes over the years when I would say, about finding your tribe, hanging out with people who believe like you, and people will say, oh, well, it's about unifying and spending time with people who aren't like you. Well, I believe that in our daily lives we spend time with all different kinds of people,
Right,
just being alive in the world.
right.
Yet during our chosen free time, or however we want to think about it, to spend time with, one of my friends calls it, a high vibe tribe, is really helpful to us at this
I
time,
love
right?
that. High vibe
To
tribe.
Yeah, to keep us, like really trusting what we're saying and staying
Yes.
on that path instead
Mm-hmm.
of like talking ourselves back out of it again.
Right.
And so I feel like maybe one of the clues to this is your Gaia's temple. And I'd love for you to share a little bit, like, what is that, and how does it work, and who is it for, and all of that.
I would love to talk about that. And I want to make sure I say one thing, because I don't know if I actually addressed the last question you asked or what you brought up, which is that when you talk about the divine feminine, it frightens men.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I do want to just address that. Of course it frightens men.
Mm-hmm,
Of course it
mm-hmm,
does,
mm-hmm.
because men are at the top of the heap, and anything that they would perceive as threatening their position is frightening.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think really that women's power is extraordinary.
Yes.
And it's not about brute strength, which is not
Mm-mm.
the only power that men have. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, I get it.
But the power of women, women's power is so extraordinary and so multifaceted. And I think that that it's threatening. And in fact, I think it is that exact feeling of being threatened that gave rise to the patriarchy to begin with.
Yes, yes. Yeah, you are spot on with that. And I think about the patriarchy, or the old paradigm, as I like to think of it,
Yes.
before 2012,
Mm-hmm.
before we had this shift into the age of Aquarius and the
Yes.
feminine divine. The attributes and values, we were talking about that a little bit before, that were really considered like top of the heap, were things like domination, competition, power
Oh, yeah.
over, acquisition,
Yeah.
logic over intuition,
Right.
matter. It was just like the
Right.
things that, and so what that meant was that these feminine divine principles, like love and compassion and collaboration and kind-heartedness, they were seen as weak and not valuable.
Right. Right.
And I really feel like part of the shift is seeing that those are our greatest strengths. They
They
really,
totally are.
truly are.
They really, truly are. They
And,
really, truly are.
you
Yeah.
know,
Love, compassion, kindness, these don't fit in a war type situation, do they?
no, they
No, we got to
don't.
toughen up and pick up that gun and go after it.
That's right. Yeah.
So we couldn't cultivate those in order to, keep the status quo. But that status quo is wobbling now, thankfully.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is why women need to trust their intuition and need to be loving and kind and strong and demonstrate that in every chance that they get, so that they
Yes.
become more practiced at it, so that they don't emulate the same thing. I don't want to emulate the patriarchy,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
in this rise in the feminine. It's not just that we're going to be leading, uh, you know, I don't want women to lead the military, right? I want women
No.
to dismantle the need for a military,
Right. Exactly.
Right. So,
And
yeah,
that being said, women are free to do whatever the heck they want to do.
that's right.
Yet I really do believe that there's nothing worse than a patriarchal woman, personally. That's just my own thing.
It does
A
kind of feel
woman,
like a
yeah,
betrayal, doesn't
it
it?
does. It
Yeah.
does. And it feels like, why would we, as women, the way that we are wired, why would we, with these, feminine divine attributes, why would we, as you said, want to perpetuate this old way of being? And
I think, I think that happens because we have been so entrained to rely on men, our husbands, and patriarchy, the institutions, the guys at the top for our safety and security.
yes.
And so now, as we're making this shift, it's like, wait a minute. If this is gone and there go my benefits,
right.
We're not so easy. We're not so quick to toss it to the curb. And I think that's why a lot of women are still, hanging with the old paradigm, voting the way they're voting still, not seeing that there's this incredible opportunity. But I do think that more and more of us are waking up. And, the Dalai Lama said it was Western women that were going to save the world. Right? That's us. Right? That's us still with our last little modicums of freedom here. Let's use them,
It's so true. That is the top line on the back of my book, is that the Dalai Lama said the world will be saved by the Western woman. Yeah. And then I add on, I believe that's true. Yeah. And I also believe that in order for that to happen, she has to save her own world first. Yes. And that means some of the things you were talking about before with trusting ourselves and and really,
and it's practice too, right?
Yes.
Like if you if you say, if the sun is shining and something tells you as you're heading out the door to grab the umbrella and you go, oh no, the sun is shining, I'm not going to. And then later on the way home from work, you're like, dang, I wish I'd gotten that umbrella. Like, why didn't I listen to myself? But if you go out there and you go, it's sunny, but my gut is saying grab the umbrella, I'm going to grab the umbrella. And then later, when the rain is happening and you open that umbrella, it's a confirmation that your intuition is not only there, but it's correct and it's viable and it's worth listening to and operating from. And so it's just like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get at it. And then it just becomes your way instead of that odd thing that we're not sure we can trust.
It's that's it exactly. Practicing and then trusting the small things like the umbrella, and then then we can start trusting like really big decisions and choices.
Exactly. When I teach psychic development, I talk about that, about just do it with the small things, the things with no consequences. I mean, what's the big deal? So, okay, you don't have the umbrella, you get wet. It's not life or death, but start with small things in the mundane world like that. And then it shows you, this is really happening. And then you have more courage to use it for the larger life decisions.
I love it. I love it.
So Gaia's Temple.
Yes, Gaia's Temple. Gaia's Temple. So that's gaiastemple.org. And again, this will be in the show notes for people, for those of you who would like to explore this more. And that would include me. I want to do that too. I'm still learning about you, or just learning about you, I should say.
Thank you.
And even though I'm just learning some of the particulars about you, I knew the minute that I laid eyes on you at the Women in Spirituality Conference that there was a connection there. And I believe that many of us are finding that. Yes. I've been going around saying we're all finding one another again.
Isn't it exciting?
And it's like, I don't know, like, intellectually about you, but I felt what I felt, and it's like, yep. There's
Me too, you, Dawn. I felt the same way when I saw you. I felt the same way. Exactly.
So I know that what I do know about you is that you truly live from intuition and inner guidance. And so I know the question that we had talked about was, how did you learn to trust this in your life? And I feel like you've really touched on that already. You talked about being aware and practicing. And I think that maybe there's nothing, is there anything more you'd like to say about that before we move on?
I can't think of anything right now. No.
Okay, beautiful. And self-empowerment is key in women's journeys right now.
Yes.
And as we were saying before, not power over, but power within, and power with one another, I would add.
Power through.
Power through, yeah. What can you share about how a woman can reach within and begin to empower her life in new ways? Anything you can think of that might be helpful that you'd like to share?
I think it's pretty much the kind of thing that I've been talking about, which is like, what is your truth? Maybe I would say it like this. we've also been so entrained that our desires are frivolous. The don't worry your pretty little head. And oh, isn't that sweet? Like there's almost like this condescension in a patriarchy about women's dreams and desires, or that we must somehow comply, fit the bill, prove ourselves before we get the good thing, or we find the right man and he's going to give it to us. So, I came of age in the 1970s with, I was born in 59. So I was becoming a young woman in the 70s when women's liberation was, hear me roar. And I just came in a very strong feminist. And so I was just going to make my own decisions no matter what, but I think for people who are afraid to do that, it's good to remember that the reason why you're afraid is because you've been taught to be afraid. And if you examine, what would it look like if I wasn't afraid? What would it look like if I wasn't afraid to whatever, fill in the blank, to get that education, to go for that job, to get an office, paint the walls purple and read tarot cards for a living? Gee,
Yes,
what would that be like?
Yes.
And so I think it begins with visioning. And then when you find what the limits are to that vision, most likely you'll find that it does come down to feeling like I don't deserve this, or people like me don't have that great stuff. And all of that is learned thinking. It's not the truth of who we are. It's learned. And it's learned in a patriarchy, and it's learned in a suppressive society that has very limited, and I also think in many ways very shallow or surface values. Make the money. No, don't make the money. I mean, make the money. Yes, be rich. Absolutely, make all the money in the world. May we all prosper. But doing what? Giving our lives for some job in which we're miserable, or really fulfilling what our soul is calling for? And if our soul is calling for something that isn't the usual, or what most people do in order to be quote unquote okay in the world, it's worth exploring what that is. And it's worth remembering that the reason why we don't think it's okay to do that is because we've learned that it's not okay to do that. But we've learned it from a very limited source, not the expansive truth of what our soul came here to do.
Beautiful. And just as though we learned it, we can unlearn it. We can learn new behaviors.
Yes.
And so,
not by tomorrow morning necessarily.
No.
Right. But, that awareness, like, where did I get that thought that I can't live a life like this? Who told me that? Where did I learn that? And, we learn it everywhere. We learn it on television, in the movies, from our families, ancestral, it's in our DNA. I mean, we get it from everywhere. But when the consciousness tunes in to recognize, this is a story I've been told, and my soul chose this body in this life and has kind of an agenda and a karma or a dharma and something that I'm here to do. And a great exercise that I've done throughout my life when I really hit the skids, and some of those skids have been for a long period of time, I will admit that, but those dark places, they're fertile places. And, sometimes I'll just think, okay, when I'm an old woman and I imagine myself sitting on my rocking chair on my front porch, thinking back over my life, and what do I, then I'll look back at, when I was 40, for instance, and I was making that big decision. What do I want to say about myself? Do I want to say, oh, I was too afraid to go for it? Or do I want to say, good for me. I grabbed life with both hands and I went for whatever it was. And that's very helpful to think from a perspective like into the future, looking back on where you are now.
I love that.
Really good.
Well, yeah. As we come to the close of the interview portion of our podcast, I want to know.
That went fast.
I know. I told you it would.
It did.
I want to know, is there anything feeling or left undone or unsaid with our conversation?
Well, I do want to talk a little bit about Gaia's temple.
Yes, please
because we
do.
never quite got there. You asked me about it, and then I derailed back to something about the
That's
patriarchy.
okay. That's why I asked the
Talk about
question
the
I just did.
Yeah.
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I founded Gaia's Temple in 2000. That just last in September, we were 19 years old. And I did it because I had become an ordained minister on the summer solstice in 1992. And that was an independent organization that just gave me sort of legal status without tying me to any particular religious doctrine. And it was a beautiful ordination ceremony in a rose garden at Woodland Park here in Seattle. And so I already kind of had like the legal auspices as a minister. And then in the year 2000, I finally moved into my own office. I had been sharing an office with another woman, and I moved into this one here. And it just occurred to me that everywhere on Sunday mornings, people were gathering with others of a like mind in worship. And those who were pagan or who followed an earth-based spiritual path, honoring nature, inclusive of the divine feminine as well as the divine masculine. And unless they already had like their own little group or circle to gather with, they had no place to go. So I just decided I'm going to offer a goddess worship service. And you know, it's funny, I say I just decided that, but I think she kind of like whispered in my ear, like, this is your chance, you know, this is your chance. Just see what you can do with this. And I had been telling an alternative to the Demeter Persephone Greek myth about Persephone going to the underworld and, you know, the explanation of the seasons, essentially. And so I told that story in a sort of spiritual context here in my office. There were 12 women who came. And when it was over, one of them said, when's the next one? And I said, next month. And I've been offering goddess worship services on the second Sunday of every month ever since.
Oh, I love
that. And in 2004, we became a nonprofit organization, got our, you know, quote unquote church status, even though we call ourselves a temple. And it's a beautiful thing. And so each month I offer a worship service, and there's beautiful music that we sing. And essentially what I do is I write the services with 3 different components. What's going on in nature at the time as we follow the wheel of the year, going through the seasons, what is happening in our current world, and how we can meet and address those things. And then I kind of tie them all together monthly.
Oh, that sounds
and
so
there are audio podcasts, so people can tune in on the website, the Gaia's Temple website,
nice.
Which actually we're creating a new website right now, which will probably launch at the beginning of the year. So this is our old website, but you can go to gaistemple.org and listen in to the worship services. There's a strong archive there of them. But what happens, and it's open to men and women, everybody is welcome. We've got some beautiful men who come and worship the goddess.
Lovely.
It's fantastic. And, you know, it's just really something to go to a place where the divine is spoken in, you know, she and her, instead of always he and him and his. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I talk about different goddesses from different cultures and their aspects. And I talk about all kinds of things.
Oh, it sounds beautiful. I think I'm going to have to make a trip out to Seattle so I can be there with you.
Well, make sure it's in the middle of the month, Dawn, so you can come to Gaia's Temple. I would love that.
That would be one of my main reasons for coming there. So
that would be lovely.
I would love it. And in the meantime, though, it sounds like people can find out more about it at gaistemple.org.
Correct.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you, Reverend Judith Laxer, for a lovely conversation. I know that our listeners will enjoy this or are enjoying this as much as I have been. And I want to thank you so much for saying yes to yourself and for sharing what you've learned along the way with others.
Thank you so much, Dawn. This has just been such a pleasure. It's been just so beautiful to speak with you about something that is so near and dear to my heart and also to your heart. And to have such an intelligent, high-level conversation is just a treasure to me. Thank you so much for hosting me. I really am grateful.
It was my joy and my honor. So now I'd like to take a moment to say thank you to our sponsors, which are the Venerable Women Organization and Empowerment Foundation. You can learn more about Venerable Women by reading my book, Transform Ourselves, Transform the World, or listening to it on audible.com. The 12 Venerable Attitudes, known as the V-Attitudes, are a foundation of inspiration. They're a how-to so that we can gracefully and communally integrate into our wholeness. The Venerable Women Empowerment Foundation supports women leaving federal prison to claim their worth and dignity and be part of the Dalai Lama's prediction that the world will be saved by the Western woman. It's all hands on deck to create the world that we want to live in, and our incarcerated sisters are very ready to go. We support the women by providing basics like bras, underwear, toiletries, coaching, and leadership skills. It's a joy to see all of the transformations that we get to see our luminary leaders going into the prison halfway houses and other areas that help women who are in transition or women who are at risk at different points in their lives. So also, if you have a topic that you would like for us to bring to the fore, to bring to our podcast, please email me at dawn@venerablewomen.com. Or if you have a guest that you would like me to interview, I would really love to do that. So, in sisterhood, we trust our intuition, we make bold, inspired choices, and we take action to bring our wisdom to life so that we manifest a kind and loving world together. Thank you so much, listeners, for transforming the world by transforming yourself. Every blessing to you. Thank you for being part of this sacred conversation, and we look forward to connecting with you at our next podcast. Until then, keep your own sacred conversations going, and please share this podcast with others you think would enjoy it. Embrace your venerability and see the venerability in all people. My love to each one of you.